I'm Jake Tapper, and today returning that Salvadoran man who was, by the administration's own admission, mistakenly deported from the United States to a notorious prison in El Salvador. Well, that just got even more difficult and uncertain. President Donald Trump and El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele both made clear during an Oval Office meeting earlier today that Abrego Garcia will not be coming back to the United States. This despite the United States Supreme Court ruling that the Trump administration must, quote, facilitate Garcia's return. Attorney General Pam Bondi says the U.S. would be willing to facilitate it by providing a plane, but El Salvador's president says he does not have the power to return Garcia to the United States. This leaves Garcia in a sort of legal no man's land, although he's very much in a very real, notorious prison. Trump officials today deflected from the fact that they mistakenly deported him in the first place.
Foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country.
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador.
I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country.
Now, just a quick fact check on some of this and some important background on Garcia, who is married to a U.S. citizen. He has one child with her and two stepchildren. It is true that Garcia is a citizen of El Salvador, and it is true that he entered the United States illegally sometime around 2011. His attorneys say that he was initially fleeing gang violence in El Salvador. As for the allegation that he's a member of MS-13, which he fervently denies, well, the evidence of that is much more flimsy. According to court documents, Garcia and three other men were arrested in 2019. He was asked if he was a gang member. He said no. Garcia had been deemed a gang member by the Prince George's County Police Department in part because he was at the time wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie, and a confidential informant claimed that Garcia was an active member of MS-13, although he denied that at the time. Now, later that year, an immigration judge granted Garcia protective status, allowing him to stay in the United States legally, finding that even though Garcia was liable for deportation because he was in the country illegally, he should be protected from deportation, the judge said, to El Salvador because that would constitute a danger to him. Here we are 6 years later. Despite that protective order and despite zero criminal convictions, Garcia is now back in El Salvador, and not just El Salvador, in a notorious prison there. And while Trump's officials claim and admit, rather, that it was an oversight that he was deported to begin with, they're still clinging to this rather shoddily proven claim that he is, without question, an MS-13 member. And they're doing that to justify the fact that he is sitting in this prison in El Salvador. Now, CNN's Caitlin Collins is at the White House now. And Caitlin, your questions in the Oval Office led to all that pushback we just saw.
Yeah, Jake, and what we got from that was something that had been building over the last few days, but today in the Oval Office marked the clearest moment yet that we were hearing from the Trump administration, not just the president, but as you played there, several of his top officials, and President Bukele of El Salvador himself, the clearest statement yet that they have no intention of returning this man to the United States, despite that Supreme Court ruling that was 9-0 that argued that the United States must facilitate his return back to the United States. Obviously, the White House has now been arguing, as you heard Stephen Miller and the Attorney General Pam Bondi arguing there, that the courts cannot dictate what they argue is foreign policy, which they are saying that that is the matter here, and that the only way that this individual can be returned to the United States, in their view, is if the president of El Salvador himself returns him. And so that was the moment that we took in the Oval Office there, where I asked for the President Bukele, to weigh in on this himself, on whether he has any plans to return him. And this is what he told us. President Bukele, weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to be suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you can release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country.
You saw the president was smiling as Bukele was making that argument there, saying that he would not return him to the United States. But Jake, I'll note, as you kept hearing from officials saying that they could not, that this man did not belong in the United States, that he should not be here because he was from El Salvador initially. Of course, it was that immigration judge in 2019 who ruled that he could not be deported and removed from the United States to El Salvador. And that is what led to 3 officials from the Trump administration, including the Solicitor General of the United States, arguing that, yes, this was an administrative error, that he was sent to El Salvador, that it was a mistake, and that he was not supposed to be sent there. And that is what has led to this whole argument. And I should note that there is supposed to be an update from Justice Department attorneys in court in the next hour or so, I believe just right now. So we'll see what they say. But I think the president himself made it very clear that they do not intend to return him to the United States, Jake.
Yeah, I think most people probably have more of an issue of him being deported to a notorious prison than they do have an issue with him being deported in general. But Trump is also suggesting he would like to send so-called homegrown violent criminals, American citizens, to prisons in El Salvador.
Yeah, by homegrown criminals, he is essentially saying U.S. citizens who commit crimes. And the president alluded to this on Air Force One over the weekend, and he repeated that sentiment in the Oval Office there when another reporter followed up and asked him if that is something that he intends to do, having American citizens be sent to prisons in El Salvador because of crimes they commit in the United States. And the president was focusing, he said, particularly on U.S. citizens who commit particularly heinous crimes. He mentioned, abusing grandmothers and whatnot as he was there in the Oval Office. But he was making very clear that he would be on board with this idea. He did reference the Attorney General Pam Bondi, who was seated there on the couch in front of where I was standing, saying that they are studying the law on whether or not they can actually do that. Obviously, it has raised all kinds of constitutional questions, given those people are, as he acknowledged, U.S. citizens. But he embraced it essentially wholeheartedly, Jake, in the Oval Office.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thanks so much. Caitlin, of course, will have much more on her show, The Source, tonight at 9 Eastern, only on CNN. CNN's Paula Reed is with me now. And Paula, Trump and President Trump and President Bukele made it clear that Abrego Garcia will not be returned to the United States, despite this U.S. Supreme Court ruling saying that Trump had to facilitate his return. So are they just ignoring a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, or is the fact that the ruling was so mushy, in your words, giving him an opening?
It's a technical term I learned in law school, Jake. Mushy, look, they're working within the ambiguity that the Supreme Court justices gave them. They did not order the administration to return him to the United States. They said that they need to facilitate this return. They could have said, we order him returned, but they didn't do that. So you heard the Attorney General. She was being very careful in the Oval Office when she was asked, would you help? She says, of course we'd provide a plane, right? Thereby facilitating whatever El Salvador is doing. The Supreme Court appeared to defer to the executive branch, given that this is an international matter. And you see, yes, it does look a little bit like a semantic game, but they are playing within the bounds of what the Supreme Court ruled. So no, they are not defying this order.
And take a listen to how White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller views it.
And a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the president could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador.
Stephen, you got the win. I don't know why he had to go so far, because what he's saying is not completely accurate. No, I'm talking to a kidnapping. All right. So the district court said that the administration needed to facilitate and effectuate the return of this man to the United States and gave a date. The Supreme Court says, yes, you need to facilitate this. But when it comes to effectuating, making it happen, they said this needs to go back down to the lower court. They need to clarify what that meant. And they warned the lower court, you need to be deferential to the executive branch because we're talking about foreign affairs. And they gave no deadline. So again, they're not running afoul, but Stephen's summary of the case there, the holding, it's not exactly accurate.
All right, Paula Reed, thanks so much. Appreciate it. With us now, Frimpong.